Hey there, Grade 7. Welcome to another Explainer. Today we're tackling a massive, honestly pretty thrilling topic, how we actually uncover the hidden secrets of ancient history. We're going to learn the exact, fundamental skills that separate just a casual observer from a real, true historical detective. So, grab your mental magnifying glasses and let's get started.
So, think about this for a second. How do historians and geographers actually know what happened and where it mattered? I mean, we don't exactly have the luxury of hopping into a time machine, zipping back 3,000 years, and just interviewing people on the street. No way. Instead, historians kind of have to act like detectives. They arrive at the scene of a cold case, and we're talking a really cold case here, and they literally have to piece together the truth using only the evidence that somehow managed to survive the test of time.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our investigative action plan for today. First up, solving history's mysteries. Then, primary versus secondary sources. After that, the big source myth. Then we'll do a case study on analyzing evidence. And finally, your turn to classify a source.
Section 1. Solving history's mysteries. Clues from the past.
Basically, sources are the evidence historians use to support claims about the past. This is absolutely crucial, a real core outcome for us today. You see, in ancient history, you can't just make a random guess about what happened. You have to build your timeline, draw your maps, and actually support your claims with solid proof. If you're going to say a certain civilization was incredibly wealthy, well, you need a source, a tangible piece of evidence to back that up.
Section 2. Primary versus secondary sources. Defining the evidence.
First up is the primary source. This is evidence created exactly during the time period being studied, by someone who actually experienced or witnessed the event. Think of this as your raw, first-hand evidence. If we're studying ancient Rome, for example, a primary source could be an ancient coin, a letter written by a Roman senator, a sword dug up from a battlefield, or an inscription carved on a monument. It's that direct, literal link straight from the actual time. Now, let's move to our next tool and see how this builds our understanding. The secondary source is evidence created later by someone who is analyzing, synthesizing, or interpreting the past. These are the reports made by the people who study those initial primary clues we just talked about. A perfect example of a secondary source is your history textbook, or maybe a modern map of ancient trade routes, or even an article written by an archaeologist in 2024. So, the absolutely crucial point is this. The entire difference relies on exactly when the source was created in relation to the historical event. Primary is during, secondary is after. It really is that simple. If you're ever confused, just ask yourself one question. Was the creator of this evidence alive and present for the event, or are they looking back on it from the future? Section 3. The big source myth. Fact versus fiction. All right, it is time for us to step into the role of historical mythbusters. There's this huge myth out there. Many people falsely assume that older evidence, the primary source, is perfectly true just because it's from that time period. And they think newer evidence, the secondary source, cannot be trusted because it's just someone's biased opinion. Guys, this is a massive misconception. Being older does not automatically make something a fact, and being newer definitely does not automatically make something a guess. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that it shows the reality of both source types. Yes, a primary source has the amazing strength of being a first-hand account, but honestly, it can contain heavy bias. The person writing it might have a super limited perspective. I mean, maybe they only saw one side of the battlefield, or they might purposely be leaving out gaps of information. On the other hand, a secondary source allows a modern historian to synthesize multiple sources and offer really valuable context that the people living back then didn't even know. But of course, its limitation is that it relies entirely on whatever surviving clues we happen to have, and the author is totally distant from the actual event. So the takeaway? Both types require critical analysis. Neither gets our automatic trust, and neither gets our automatic distrust. Section 4. Case Study. Analyzing Evidence. Ancient Inscriptions versus Modern Texts. Okay, let's try a little experiment. Imagine you're an archaeologist, and you dig up this ancient stone inscription. It reads, "I, the great king, conquered the valley and defeated 1,000,000 enemies single-handedly." Now this is a primary source, right? It was carved during the event by the king's workers. But wait, do we automatically trust it? No way! The creator clearly has a wildly biased, exaggerated perspective. Defeated 1,000,000 enemies single-handedly? Yeah, probably not. It's obviously propaganda designed to make the king look incredibly powerful and strike fear into his rivals. Now fast forward. Let's look at a secondary source describing that exact same event. A passage from a modern textbook says, "The king's army took control of the valley, though military records suggest the enemy force was small and suffering from famine." Notice how this secondary source synthesizes multiple primary records. It takes the king's inscription, but it also looks at the military supply records to offer a much more objective, realistic context of what actually went down.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why historians desperately need to cross-reference both types of sources. The primary inscription tells us all about the king's ego and his propaganda, but it cannot tell us the actual, unexaggerated facts of the battle. On the flip side, the modern textbook tells us the broader historical context and the actual conditions, like the famine, but it cannot tell us the raw, emotional experience of living in that era like the ancient stone carving does. To uncover the full, vibrant truth of history, it's like a giant puzzle. We literally need both pieces.
Section 5. Your turn. Classify it. The final challenge.
All right, detectives, here is your scenario. You find an essay written in the year 2026 about the daily life of ancient Egyptian farmers. First, ask yourself, based on when this was created, is it a primary or a secondary source? Once you have that figured out, use what we learned today to identify one clear strength and one clear limitation of this specific piece of evidence. I want you to really think about this, maybe discuss it with your classmates, and start applying these tools to every single piece of history you encounter. You are now officially historical detectives, so get out there and start questioning the evidence.